Welcome to Relaxing Subjects. Come in. Wherever you are, however late it has gotten, you have found the right place to be. There is nothing you need to do here except lie down and let the sound of a voice carry you towards sleep. You do not need to sit up. You do not need to concentrate. You do not need to remember a single word of what you are about to hear. If you drift off in the middle of a sentence, that is not a failure. That is exactly what this is for. Let the words become a kind of weather in the room, something you can rest inside of, something that asks nothing back from you. Tonight we are going to spend some slow time with a very short and very old teaching. It comes from the Buddhist tradition, and it is called the Sallatha Sutta. The name is not important to remember. If you would like the reference, for the part of you that likes to know where a thing comes from, it is catalogued as SN 36.6, the sixth discourse in a collection called the Connected Discourses on Feeling. But you do not need any of that. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to listen tonight. You do not need to believe anything. You do not need to agree. There is no belief being asked of you here, no doctrine to accept, nothing to sign, nothing to become. There is only a very small and very human observation made a long time ago about something that happens inside almost everyone, and it happens most of all in the dark, when the house is quiet and there is nothing left to distract the mind from itself. So before we begin, let yourself settle. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding it, the mattress, the pillow, the cushion, the blanket. Notice how the surface underneath you is doing all the work of holding you up, and how you do not have to help it. You can let your body be heavy. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they have been living all day. Let the jaw loosen, let the hands rest. And take one slow, deep breath in through the nose and let it go, unhurried, all the way out. There, that is enough. That is all the effort this will ever ask of you. And if you feel like it, before your eyes close for good, you might leave a small note in the comments, just what time it is where you are, and the name of the place you are listening from, a city, a town, a room, not because it matters to the teaching, but because there is something quietly good about knowing that all across the world, at this same strange hour, other people are lying in the dark just like you, listening to the same voice, carrying their own version of the same thing you are carrying. You are not the only one awake. You never were. Thank you for being here with us at Relaxing Subjects. Let us begin. I want to start with something you already know, better than you would like to. It is late, later than you meant it to be. You did everything right. You turned off the lights, you got comfortable, you closed your eyes, and for a moment there was quiet. And then it started. Not a sound, a picture, a sentence someone said to you, a look on a face. A decision you made, or a decision that was made about you, or a door that closed, or a thing you lost. It arrived on its own, uninvited, the way it always does, and now it is playing. And you are watching it. Again. And here is the part that hurts more than the memory itself. You have seen it already. You saw it this afternoon. You saw it yesterday. You have seen it so many times that you know every frame, and there is nothing new in it, and nothing you can do to it, because it is already over. It happened once, in the real world, at a real time, and it is finished. It cannot be changed. And yet here it is again, running behind your eyes, and here you are again, watching it, gripping it, turning it over, looking for the place where you could have said the other thing, done the other thing, been the other person. and the clock keeps moving. It is 1 in the morning. It is 2. And you lie there thinking, quietly, in the way people only think this to themselves in the dark, what is wrong with me? Why can I not put this down? Why do I keep doing this to myself? I want you to hear this, gently, before anything else. The fact that your mind is doing this is not a flaw in you. It is not a defect. It is not a sign that you are broken or weak, or that you have failed at some test of calmness that other people pass. What is happening to you right now, in this bed, at this hour, is one of the oldest human experiences there is. It is so old and so common and so precisely known that someone described it in almost exactly these terms roughly 25 centuries ago, and the description was so accurate that people memorized it and carried it forward, mouth to mouth, generation after generation, all the way to this room, to this night, to you. They did not carry it because it was clever. They carried it because it was true, and because it named something they recognized in themselves, the same thing you are recognizing right now. You are not the first person to lie awake replaying something. You are simply the latest. And the thing this old teaching noticed is this: when something painful happens to a person, they are not struck once. They are struck twice. 2 darts, not 1. Let that sit for a moment, because everything tonight rests on it, and it is worth going slowly. 2 darts, not 1. The teaching uses the image of an arrow or a dart, a small, sharp thing that pierces, and it says that when pain comes to an untrained mind, that mind is pierced twice, first by the thing itself, and then, a moment later, by a second dart. And here is the strange and important part, the part that took me a long time to really understand, so we will take our time with it. The second dart is not thrown by the world. It is not thrown by the person who hurt you. It is not thrown by fate, or bad luck, or God, or anyone else at all. The second dart is one you are holding, and you are the one who drives it in. You were struck once. Everything after that, you have been doing yourself. I know how that could sound if it were said quickly or coldly, or by the wrong kind of voice. It could sound like a scolding. It could sound like one more person telling you to just get over it, just stop thinking about it, just move on, as if you had not already tried that 1,000 times, as if the trying were not itself part of the exhaustion. So I want to be very careful here, because this teaching is not that, and the misunderstanding of it as that is exactly the thing we are going to take apart tonight, slowly, so that you can set it down for good. Because here is the first thing the teaching says, and it is the thing almost everyone gets wrong, and it changes everything. This teaching does not ask you to feel less about what happened. Read that again in your mind, softly. It does not ask you to feel less. The pain of the first dart, the real event, the loss, the words, the thing that actually happened to you, that pain is real, and the teaching never once pretends it is not. It never tells you that a wise person would not feel it. In fact, it says the opposite, and it says it plainly, and this is the sentence that took 25 centuries to reach you and is the one worth staying awake 1 more minute for. The teaching says that even the trained person, even the wise one, even the one who has practiced for years, is still struck by the first dart, and still feels it. Fully. All of it, the bodily pain, the real ache of the real thing. They do not feel a smaller version. They do not float above it. They do not smile serenely through it, because they have transcended it. They feel it, the whole of it, the way you feel it, because it is a real dart and it makes a real wound. So whatever you have been told about this, that Buddhism means feeling nothing, that being at peace means not caring, that the goal is to become so detached that nothing touches you, set that down. It is not what this teaching says. The wound is allowed, the grief is allowed. The ache you are carrying tonight over the thing that happened, that is not the second dart. That is the first one, and the first one is not the problem. You are permitted to hurt over what hurt you. Nobody is taking that away from you tonight. Nobody is asking you to pretend it did not land. I want you to feel the relief in that, because it is a real relief, and you may not have felt it in a long time. So much of what gets said to a person in pain, however kindly it is meant, carries a quiet accusation underneath it. Don't dwell on it. Don't let it get to you. You're stronger than this. And every one of those, however gentle, tells you the same thing. That your pain is a little bit your fault, that a better person would already be over it, that the feeling itself is the failure. And so on top of the pain, you carry shame about the pain. And the shame makes you grip it tighter. This teaching lifts that off you. It says no, the feeling of the first dart is not your failure. The wise feel it too. You are not doing anything wrong by hurting. So then, if even the wise still feel the first dart fully, then what, exactly, is the second one? What is it made of? If it is not the pain of the event itself, then what is this other thing, this added thing, that lands after? Hold that question. We will spend real time inside of it, because that is where the whole teaching lies. But I will tell you now that the answer is larger and stranger than most people who quote this teaching ever go on to say. Almost everyone stops at the 2 arrows. They give you the pretty picture, 2 darts, not one, and then they stop and leave you there as if the picture alone were the medicine. It is not, because the teaching does not stop at 2 arrows either. There is a second half to it, a buried half that almost no one reads aloud, and it is the half that actually explains why you cannot put the thing down tonight. We will get there. That is the promise I am making you for the hour ahead. Not just the picture, the mechanism underneath it, and the way out that the text itself gives you, and the permission wrapped around the whole of it. But we get there slowly, the way it was meant to be received. Because a thing like this cannot be rushed into. It has to be let in. So let us slow all the way down, and let me read you the heart of it, the actual image, the way it was actually put. And I am going to read it slowly, and I am going to say some of it more than once. And I want to tell you in advance that the repeating is not an accident, and it is not me padding the hour. The repeating is part of how this teaching was built, and later I will tell you the rather beautiful reason why. For now, just let the repetition do to you what it was designed to do. Let it lull, let it loop, let the same shape come around, again and again, like a slow tide, until it stops being information and becomes something closer to a rhythm you can breathe with. Here is the picture. When an untrained person is touched by a painful feeling, the teaching says they sorrow, and they grieve, and they lament, they beat their breast, they become distraught. And in doing all of that, the teaching says they feel 2 feelings, one in the body and one in the mind, a bodily feeling and a mental feeling, 2 feelings where there might have been one. And then comes the image, the one that has outlived empires. It is, the teaching says, as if a man were struck by a dart. And then, following the first dart, right behind it, he is struck by a second dart, so that he feels the pain of 2 darts. Not 1. 2, the wound of the arrow, and then, into that same raw place, a second arrow. That is the untrained mind. That is the ordinary mind. That is, if we are honest, your mind and mine, on most nights, including this one. Struck by the thing, and then struck again by everything we do about the thing. Now hear the other half of the picture, because the teaching does not leave you with only the wound. It shows you the other person, the trained one, and it uses the very same words, deliberately, so that you can feel the difference land in the one place where the two sentences part ways. When the trained person, the one who has practiced, is touched by that same painful feeling, the very same one, no gentler, no smaller. They do not sorrow and grieve and lament and beat their breast and become distraught. And so, the teaching says, they feel one feeling, a bodily one, not a mental one. It is, the teaching says, as if a man were struck by a dart and then were not struck by a second dart, so that he feels the pain of only one dart. One, the first one, the real one, and no more. Sit with how simple that is and how enormous. Two people, the same painful thing reaches both of them. It is identical. The same loss, the same sharp word, the same closed door, the same ache in the same place. And one of them ends up feeling two darts, and the other ends up feeling one. The event did not change. The pain of the event did not change. So where did the second dart come from? It came from inside. It was added. It was, in the most literal and least blaming sense of the word, done, and I want to be so careful with that word, done. Because your mind, tired and raw as it is tonight, may want to hear it as an accusation. You're doing it to yourself, so stop. But that is not the tone of the original at all, and it is not my tone tonight, and it will not be my tone for the whole of this hour. Done does not mean chosen. It does not mean you sat down and decided to torture yourself with the replay. Nobody does that. Done here means something much gentler and much more freeing. It means the second dart is not part of the event. It is not welded to the wound. It is not a fixed feature of what happened to you, carved into the world, permanent and yours forever. It is a separate motion, a second, separate thing. And anything that is separate and added and done, however unconsciously, however automatically, however many thousands of times, is a thing that can eventually be not done. That is the whole hope of it. Not tonight, maybe, not all at once, but the door exists, and the teaching's entire gift is to show you where the door is by first showing you that there are two things here, not one. Because that is the thing almost nobody does for a person in pain. Almost everything ever said to a suffering person treats the pain and the suffering as one single object. One wound. One weight. One solid, undivided thing that you are simply stuck carrying until time wears it down. And so you experience it that way too, as one great mass pressing on you, indivisible, with no seam, no handle, no place to set it down, because it is all one piece. This old teaching does the one thing that almost no comfort ever does. It reaches into that single mass, and it finds the seam. It says, this is not one thing. This is two. There is the thing that happened, and there is the thing you keep doing about the thing that happened. And they are not the same. They were never the same. You have been carrying them as one weight, because no one ever showed you they could come apart. And once you see that they are two, a very strange and very hopeful thing becomes possible, though it will take us the rest of the night to grow into it. You begin to be able to feel the first one fully, to grieve the real loss, to ache over the real wound, honestly, without shame, while slowly, gently, over time, learning to not drive in the second, not by feeling less, by feeling more cleanly, by letting the real pain be the real pain, whole and unashamed, and letting the added pain, the replay, the 10,000th showing of the film you already know by heart, begin to loosen its grip. Because you have finally seen that it is a separate thing, and that it was never the wound itself, only your hand on a second dart. I told you there was a buried half to this teaching, and there is, and we will get there. It answers the question of what exactly that second dart is made of, because it turns out it is not one thing but several, a whole small machinery of the mind, and the teaching names each part of it with a precision that will surprise you. And it answers the deeper question underneath your whole sleepless night, which is not really why did this happen, but why can't I stop turning it over? There is an answer to that in the text, an old and merciful one, and it does not shame you for the turning. But those are for the hours ahead. Right now, we have done enough. We have laid down the one image that everything else will grow out of. 2 darts, not one. You were struck once. The rest you have been doing, which means the rest, someday, gently, can stop. So let us pause here for a little while and simply rest. You do not need to hold on to anything we have said. If the picture of the 2 darts stayed with you, good. Let it drift there quietly at the back of the mind, doing its slow work without your help. And if it did not, if the words have already begun to blur into the dark, that is good too. That is even better, because that is the sound of you letting go. Take a slow, deep breath now, in, through the nose, filling the belly, and then let it go, all the way out, longer than you took it in. And another. Feel the body a little heavier than it was when we started. Feel the places that have already softened without your asking them to, perhaps the forehead, perhaps the hands, perhaps a small loosening somewhere in the chest. Notice how the room holds you. Notice how nothing in this exact moment is being asked of you. The thing that happened is not happening now. It happened once. And it is over, and here in this bed, in this breath, it is only a memory. And a memory cannot pierce you unless you pick up the dart. And you do not have to pick it up. Not tonight. Tonight you can just breathe and rest, and let the voice carry you a little further into the quiet. And when you are ready, we will continue together. We are here again. Softly, there is no need to gather yourself up, or to sit forward, or to try. The breath has done most of it for you already. Let us simply return, the way you would return to a warm room. And let us look once more at the picture we set down before you drifted, but this time slower, closer, the way you might turn a small stone over in your hand in the last light of the day. There is a discourse, very old, very short. It has a name in the old language, Pali, the tongue these words were first held in. Sallatha Sutta. Salla means a dart, an arrow, a barb, a splinter, a small sharp thing that goes into the body. And so the discourse is sometimes called the arrow and sometimes called the dart, and both are right, because that is all the word means, a thing that pierces. It sits in a part of the old collection called the Connected Discourses on Feeling. Feeling, that is the whole subject of it. Not belief, not doctrine. Feeling, the thing you came into this bed already carrying. And here is what it says in its plainest shape. When a painful feeling touches a person who has not been trained, that person sorrows over it, grieves, laments, beats the breast, becomes distraught. And the discourse says something very precise about what has happened inside that person. It says he feels 2 feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. 2, and then it gives you the picture, the one that will not leave you once it has arrived. It is as if a man were pierced by a dart, and then, following the first piercing, following it, coming after it, struck by a second dart, so that he feels the pain of two darts, where there was only ever one wound to begin with. Let those words be slow. A man is pierced by a dart. That is the thing that happened, the sentence someone said to you, the door that closed, the loss you did not choose, the mistake you cannot take back. That is the first dart, and it went in, and it hurt, and it was real. Nothing in this old text argues with that. And then, following it, a second dart. And the question the whole night turns on is this one. Quiet and enormous, where did the second dart come from? Because listen to what the discourse says about the trained person, the one who has learned this. When a painful feeling touches that person, the very same painful feeling, mind you, not a smaller one, not a gentler life, that person feels one feeling. Bodily, not mental. As if pierced by a dart, but not struck by a second dart. So he feels the pain of only one dart, the same wound, the same event, and yet only one dart. Sit with the strangeness of that for a moment, here in the dark, where nothing is being asked of you and there is nowhere you have to be. Two people, touched by the same pain. One feels it twice, one feels it once, and the difference is not in the pain. The pain was identical. The difference is in the second dart, the one that came after, the one that is somehow optional in a way the first one never was. Now, here is the part I want to lay in your hands very gently, because it is the part almost everyone gets wrong, and getting it wrong has hurt a great many people who were already hurting. This teaching does not say the wise feel less. It does not say the trained heart is a colder heart, or a number heart, or a heart that has learned not to care. Read it again, slowly. The trained person still feels the bodily painful feeling. All of it. The first dart still goes in. It is still sharp. It is still felt, fully, and the discourse never once asks the person to feel less about the thing that actually happened. This matters so much, because so often when a person is in pain, the world leans in and says, in one way or another, feel less, get over it. It was not that bad. Others have it worse. And the ache, underneath the ache, the one that keeps you awake at 2 a.m, is often that quiet shame, the sense that you should have moved past this by now, that your grief is a kind of failure. That a stronger person, a wiser person, would not still be lying here with this. And this old text, 25 centuries old, reaches through all of that and says something no one seems to say to you anymore. It says, the first arrow is real. The first arrow is allowed. Feeling it fully is not the mistake. The wise feel it too. Your grief over the thing that happened is not the thing that has gone wrong. Breathe with that if you can. You are not being told that you feel too much. You are not being scolded for the size of your sorrow. The one who has walked the whole path still weeps at a loss. The first dart lands in them too, and they let it. So whatever brought you here tonight, whatever the first dart was, you are permitted to have been wounded by it. That was never the second dart. That was only the first. And so we are left with the real question, the one the rest of this long night will slowly, kindly open. If the first dart is unavoidable, and even the wise feel it whole, then what exactly is the second dart made of? What is that second piercing, the one that is somehow ours to loose or to hold? The old word for it is anuveda, the piercing after. A second going in, that follows the first. And you already know it, you have felt it 1,000 times, though perhaps you never had a name for it, never saw it as a separate thing at all. You thought it was all one solid wound. This teaching does something almost nothing else does. It takes the one solid weight you have been carrying and it separates it, cleanly, into two. The thing that happened, and the thing you keep doing with the thing that happened. But I am going to leave that mostly closed for now, like a door left open just a crack with the light behind it, because there is something else you should know before we go any further in. And it is this. Most people, when they meet this teaching, meet only the two arrows. The picture is so good, so complete, that they stop there. They quote it, they pass it along, they make it into a tidy little saying, and they never read the rest. Because the discourse does not stop at two arrows. There is a second half to it, a buried half, and almost no one reads it aloud. It goes deeper. It names what you do next, after the second dart, the thing your mind reaches for in the dark, the very thing you may have reached for tonight before you found this voice. And when we come to it, it will not shame you for it. It will only show you, with great tenderness, why you reach. That is for the deeper part of the night. For now, it is enough to have the two darts held apart, the way you would hold two small stones in two open hands, feeling the difference in their weight. One you did not choose. One, it turns out, you have been carrying by choice you never knew you were making. And a thing, carried by choice, however old the habit, however tired the hand. A thing like that can, one day, gently, be set down. So let us rest again here for a moment. There is no hurry to reach the rest of it. This old text waited 25 centuries. It can wait for your next breath. Take one now, slow, in through the nose, down into the belly, and let it go, long and unhurried, into the dark. Let the two darts sit quietly at the edge of your mind, one in each open hand, and let your hands grow heavy. You do not have to decide anything about them tonight. You only have to breathe and let the weight of the body sink a little further into the bed and let the voice go on carrying you, slowly, further into the quiet. And when you are ready, we will continue together. There is a word in the Pali. It is not a long word. It takes less than a breath to say. But the thing it names has been happening inside you, perhaps for years, perhaps for this whole night, and knowing that there is a word for it, an old word, precise and quiet, can sometimes do something that no amount of explaining can. The word is Ayurveda. Say it slowly if you like, or simply let it rest on the surface of your mind like a leaf on still water. Ayurveda, 2 syllables, then 2 more. Anu means after, or following. Veda means piercing. Together they name a second piercing that follows the first, a dart that enters after another dart has already entered. A wound struck again, in the place where a wound already is. The discourse does not say the second dart lands nearby. It does not say it glances off the side, or finds a different angle, or arrives at some remove from the first. The commentarial reading of Ayurveda, the way that scholars and monastics who have sat with this language for centuries understand the image, is that the second piercing is a following, a going after, a movement that pursues the first into the very place the first has already opened. The first arrow finds the skin, the second arrow finds the wound, and this is the thing that is so difficult to sit with, and that is also, once you see it clearly, quietly astonishing. Because the mind does not register it that way. When you lie here tonight, replaying the thing, the mind does not say, I have been struck once, and I am now striking the same place again, myself, with a dart I am holding. The mind says, I am in pain. The mind says, "This is the wound." It puts the original event and the replaying of the original event into one experience, one weight, one solid ache that seems to have no seam in it, no join, no place where you could slip a finger between one part and the other and find where one ends and the next begins. This is what the Sallatha Sutta, this small ancient discourse, does that almost nothing else does. It finds the seam. It says there is a join, there is a place where the first dart ends and the second begins. And because there is a join, there are two things, not one. And because there are two things, one of them is not the event itself. One of them is something added to the event. Something the mind has been doing, quietly, faithfully, every time it returns to the original wound and goes in again. Let us sit with that word a little longer. Anuveda, the piercing after. You were pierced. That is the first fact, and it is not in question. The teaching does not soften it, does not look away from it, does not say the first dart was smaller than you thought, or that you are wrong to have felt it land. You felt it land. The body registered the impact. That is real. The training of the noble disciple, according to this discourse, does not change the fact of the first arrow. It does not file down its tip. But the word Anuveda is pointing at the arrow you did not see coming, the one that arrived in its wake, the one that entered the wound that was already there. And the extraordinary claim of the discourse, the claim that has kept it alive for 25 centuries in the specific, compressed, unforgettable shape of a body, struck once and then struck again, is that the second dart is not fired at you. It is fired from you, by you. With a bow your hands have been holding so long they have forgotten the weight of it. This is why the image stays. You can hear 100 explanations of why we suffer and forget all of them before morning. But a body with 2 darts in it, and the second one held by the hand of the person who is hurting. That is an image that does not leave. It changes shape when you close your eyes. It becomes something personal. You know which dart you did not fire, and you begin very quietly, in the dark, to wonder about the one you did. Now, before we go any further into the mechanism, into the second half of the discourse that almost no one reads aloud, before we come to what the Buddha says the untrained mind does next, after the second dart, there is something that must be said. Because there is a sentence you have very likely heard attached to this teaching, quoted as though it were the Buddha's own voice, passed from book to podcast to coffee mug to motivational card. And it has been attributed to this discourse so many times and for so long that it has almost swallowed the discourse itself. The sentence is this: pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. It is a clean sentence. It has a pleasing symmetry. It cuts the two things apart with a single blade, and it hands you the second half of the pear as a choice you are responsible for. And if you have ever been told it, in a moment when you were not doing well, when someone leaned toward you with the best of intentions and offered it as a kind of key, you may have noticed that it did something other than open a door. You may have noticed that it left you slightly more alone than you were before. Because what it implies, behind its clean grammar, is that your suffering is something you are choosing, which means if you are suffering, you are choosing wrong. Which means the problem is not what happened to you. The problem is you. That sentence is not in the Sallatha Sutta. It is not in SN 36.6. It is not in the Vedana Samyutta. It is not in the Samyutta Nikaya. It has not been located in any canonical Pali text. Scholars who have looked for it have not found it there. What is generally believed is that the phrase became widely associated with this teaching through Western self-help writing. And in some versions it has been traced to Haruki Murakami's memoir about running, a beautiful book written by a living novelist, which is a different thing altogether from a Pali discourse spoken, as tradition holds, in the 5th or 4th century before the Common Era. The confusion is understandable. The shape of the idea, the two-part structure, pain on one side and suffering on the other, resembles the teaching closely enough that the paraphrase seems like a reasonable condensation. But the condensation has changed something essential, and this is worth staying with for a moment, because the change is not a small one. The word optional carries blame. Options imply agency, and agency in the grammar of self-help implies responsibility, and responsibility, when it is applied to a person who is already hurting, curls very quickly into fault. You were struck, and now you are suffering, and suffering is optional. So why are you still suffering? The logic is unstated but present, the way a cold draft is present in a room with a window left open. You feel it before you locate it. The actual text is not doing that. The actual text is doing something far more careful, far more specific, and far more kind. It is not saying the suffering is your choice in the sense of a preference you are incorrectly exercising. It is saying the suffering is a second event, a real, additional thing that happens as a consequence of a particular way the mind meets pain. It is locating the mechanism. It is not assigning blame. The untrained person who is struck and sorrows and grieves and beats their breast and becomes distraught is not being scolded. The discourse meets them exactly where they are and says, yes, this is what happens. This is what the untrained mind does. This is not a character flaw. It is a pattern. And a pattern has a shape, and a shape can be seen, and what can be seen can, with time and gentleness, be worked with. That is a different thing from optional. That is not a door that shuts on you when you walk through it wrong. That is a lamp held steady in the dark, pointing at a path you did not know was there. So wherever you have been carrying that sentence, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, and wherever it may have made you feel in your harder moments, that your continued suffering was a kind of failure, a kind of wrong answer, a kind of weakness, you can put it down now. That is not what the Sallatha Sutta says. The real words are gentler. The real words do not blame you, they show you the mechanism. And there is a great difference between being told you are choosing wrong and being shown exactly how something happens, which is the difference between shame and understanding. Let us stay with that difference a little longer, because the reframe that the Sallatha Sutta offers is not the reframe that the popular version offers. The popular version says, you are adding suffering, so stop adding it. It puts the second arrow in your hand and tells you to put it down, as though you did not know you were holding it, as though the knowing were the ending of it. But the discourse does not simply hand you the arrow and say drop it. It shows you the whole landscape of the reflex, the aversion, the reaching, the three latent tendencies that animate the second dart, because that is what makes the teaching navigable rather than merely accusatory. We will come to that landscape, the deeper geography of the second half of the discourse, when the night is a little further along. For now, consider the reframe the discourse actually offers, which is this: the second arrow is not evidence of how badly you were hurt. It is evidence of how long you have been holding the bow. Let that settle. Take a moment with it. Do not try to apply it. Not yet. Just feel what it does to the night. The way rearranging one piece of furniture in a dark room changes where the shadows fall. You have been reading the replay as evidence of the injury. as proof of how serious the wound is, as a kind of fidelity to the event, that because you are still thinking about it, still turning it over, still waking at 2 a.m. to lie with it, the wound must be real, must be deep, must matter. And perhaps you have felt, underneath that, a quiet logic. If I stop replaying it, I am saying it did not matter. If I put it down, I am letting someone off the hook who does not deserve to be let off. If I sleep, I am moving on from something I am not ready to move on from. But the discourse is not asking you to let anyone off the hook. It is not saying the first arrow did not matter. It has never said that. The wise feel the first arrow fully, that is explicit. The trained disciple is struck by the painful feeling, and they feel it. They do not become distraught, but they feel the dart. The first feeling is not bypassed, not numbed, not philosophized away. It lands. It hurts. The difference is not in the presence of the pain, but in what happens next. So the replay is not your fidelity to the event. The replay is the second dart. And the second dart is not a measure of how deep the first one went. It is a measure of how long the bow has been drawn. Those are two different things entirely. A very small wound, badly replayed, can keep a person awake for years. And a very large wound, met with the kind of training this discourse is pointing toward, can be felt fully and still not become a second arrow. The size of the first dart and the frequency of the second are not the same measurement. They have been feeling like the same measurement because they have been happening inside the same body, inside the same ache, and the mind had no picture to tell them apart. Now it has a picture. 2 darts, one in each open hand, held up to the faint light of your attention. One you did not fire. One, it turns out, has been fired again and again from a bow you did not know you were holding. And a bow you did not know you were holding is a bow you have, just this moment, been handed. Which means it is now in your awareness. And anything that is in your awareness has, at least in principle, become something you can choose to set down. Not tonight, perhaps. The habits of the mind are old. The Bhaka, the oral reciters who memorized the suttas, who held these teachings in their bodies before there was any written page to hold them, they understood that a teaching has to be heard many times before it begins to settle into the places where it can do its work. You do not have to do anything with this tonight, except hear it. Let it go on drifting through the room, the way a voice drifts through a room when you are very nearly asleep, present but not demanding, there but not pressing, the words arriving and passing like the sound of rain. And this brings us to something about the Sallatha Sutta that is rarely mentioned, and that matters especially here, in this kind of listening, in this kind of night. The repetitions are not an accident. When you hear the discourse read slowly, and we will read it slowly, we will read it the way it was meant to be heard, with all of its repeated passages intact, you will notice that the untrained person's paragraph and the trained disciple's paragraph mirror each other almost word for word. When touched by a painful feeling, the uninstructed worldling sorrows, grieves, laments, beats the breast, becomes distraught, feels 2 feelings, bodily and mental, like one pierced by 2 darts. When touched by that same painful feeling, the instructed noble disciple does not sorrow, does not grieve, does not lament, does not beat the breast, does not become distraught, feels one feeling, bodily, not mental, like one pierced by a dart, but not by the second dart. The same words, the same cadence, the same sentence structure, held up against each other like 2 hands, one open and one closed. And it would be easy, reading it in a book with comfortable eyes and good light, to skim the second pass, to think, yes, I understood it the first time, I don't need to hear it again. But the repetition is not redundancy. The repetition is the teaching itself in a different form. The Sallatha Sutta belongs to the Sutta Piyaka, the basket of discourses, which is part of the Tipiyaka, the Pali Canon. And these texts were not written down for roughly 4 centuries after the Buddha's death. They were held in the memory of living human beings, specialists, the bhakka, the reciters, the ones whose entire vocation was to carry these words in their bodies and pass them on, learned the suttas by heart and chanted them in groups, each reciter holding a section of the canon, the whole library distributed across a community of memorizing minds. For approximately 400 years. That is not a metaphor for a long time. That is 400 years. Generations of reciters learning from other reciters, a chain of human voices stretching across 4 centuries, holding the shape of these words the way a river holds its banks, not by being rigid, but by having a form that asserts itself every time the water moves. The verbatim repetitions in the suttas are not literary flourishes. They are mnemonic architecture. They are how you remember. Say the first version. Say the mirror version. The 2 passages interlock in memory, each the other's check, the first version present to catch any drift in the second. If a word changes, the change stands out against the echo of what came before it. The repetition is the error correction built into 4 centuries of oral transmission. This is why the structure was preserved. Not by scribes or by printing presses, but by the breath and the cadence of human voices, morning after morning, in monasteries and forest dwellings, until the 4th council at Aluvihra in Sri Lanka, around 29 years before the Common Era, when the texts were finally committed to palm leaf, when the oral memory was at last given a written body. The Sallatha Sutta arrived in that writing down, having already travelled across 4 centuries in the lungs of the bhakka, intact, its repetitions preserved, because the repetitions were the vessel. And what does this mean for us tonight? It means that when you hear the discourse repeated, when you hear it read slowly, and then returned to, when the same passage comes back around at a different angle, in different surrounding words, touching the same idea from a different side, you are not experiencing a technical malfunction. You are experiencing the teaching working the way it was designed to work. The repetition is not inefficiency. It is how this particular kind of knowing travels from outside the mind to inside it. Not by being understood once, clearly, in a burst of intellectual recognition, though that recognition may have come already tonight, may be sitting quietly in you right now, but by being heard again, and then again, at a slightly different depth, the way water settles into a stone, not by impact, but by return. So when we read the 2 darts passage again, and we will, slowly, in the deeper part of the night, when the worldling's paragraph and the disciple's paragraph are placed against each other like 2 hands, open and closed, do not try to skip ahead of the repetition. Let it arrive the second time the way you would let a familiar melody arrive, not because you do not already know how it goes, but because hearing it again does something that knowing it does not do. That is the bhakka's gift across 25 centuries, not a shortcut, a return. Take a slow breath now. Not a directed breath, not an exercise, just the breath your body was going to take next, allowed to be a little deeper, a little longer on the way out. Let the exhale carry something with it. You do not have to name what. The body knows what it wants to release. Let the exhale be the letting. And as you breathe, let the room settle around you. Let the weight of the bed become more real, more specific, the particular heaviness of your legs. The place where the blanket touches your shoulder, the small sounds the building makes as the night goes on, the way darkness has a texture that is different at this hour than it was an hour ago. A little softer, a little less resistant, the way the dark just before sleep is a different country from the dark just after waking. You are on the right side of midnight. Let the words go on arriving, slow and unhurried, carrying only what you need and nothing more. Like a river that has found its own level and is moving without effort toward the place it was always going. The Sallatha Sutta has waited 25 centuries for this moment. It is in no hurry. It will still be here at the next breath. And the next. There is something else worth saying before we move further in. Something about why this particular discourse has survived in the form it has, compressed, vivid, short enough to carry in a single memory, dense enough to spend a lifetime with. Most teaching expands over time. It grows commentary, exegesis, elaboration, the explanatory scaffolding that teachers build around a central idea to help each new generation find their way in. And there is nothing wrong with that. The scaffolding is often beautiful. But the scaffolding is not the teaching. And when the scaffolding grows tall enough and dense enough, sometimes the teaching itself becomes hard to see, a small, precise thing at the center of a great accumulation of description. The Sallatha Sutta is still there at the center. You can read it in a few minutes. The original Pali, or either of its major public domain translations, Thanissaro Bhikkhu's rendering, which he titled simply The Arrow, available on Access to Insight, first posted in 1997. Or Bhikkhu Sujato's translation, which he titled The Dart, released into the public domain on Sutta Central. You can read either of them before your tea goes cold. The teaching that has been interpreted and reinterpreted and quoted and misquoted across 25 centuries is, at its center, brief enough to hold in a single sitting. This brevity is not a limitation. It may be the reason the teaching survived at all. A single vivid image, a body struck by one dart, then by a second, is a thing the mind retains, even when it cannot retain the argument that surrounds it. You may forget tonight's words. You may forget the Pali terms, the name of the discourse, the structure of the three feelings and the three latent tendencies. But the image of two darts, one that came at you and one you have been firing at yourself, that image has a way of staying. It surfaces at odd moments. It comes back when you need it. It does not need to be understood to be useful. It only needs to have been seen. And it has been seen by a great many people across a great many centuries, in a great many languages and conditions, awake and asleep, grieving and recovering, lying in the dark the way you are lying in the dark right now, wondering why the mind will not put something down that the hands would gladly release. Those people are not in the room with you, but they have lain in rooms like yours, under darkness like this, with the night going on around them and something turning over in the mind that would not be still. And the discourse reached them in its turn, and something in it was useful, and they carried it forward, and it arrived here, intact, in this form, in this voice, in this particular quiet night. That is not nothing. That is, in its own way, a kind of companionship. And now, here, before the rest pause, before we rest again, before the night deepens and we move into the second half of the discourse, the buried half that almost no one reads aloud, the part that goes further than the two darts and names what the mind does next. After it is struck, there is one more shape to hold. You have spent tonight, or some number of nights, or some number of years, carrying something that happened once as though it were happening still. The event was real. The first dart was real. You did not imagine it, did not manufacture it, did not bring it on yourself with poor thinking or insufficient resilience. It happened. It landed. It left the kind of mark that a real thing leaves when it touches a real person, not a clean mark, not a mark you could trim neatly to a shape that makes easy sense, but the irregular, specific, particular mark that this event left in this person at this time, which no one else has quite, and no one else can know from the outside. That is the first arrow. It is yours. It was real, and then, some moment after, in the minutes or the hours or the years that followed, the mind returned to it. The mind found the wound and entered it again. Not because something new happened, not because the event repeated, but because the mind, working in the way the untrained mind works, doing the only thing it knew to do, went back in, called it up, turned it over, sent the dart in again, into the place that was already tender, asking the same questions, landing in the same wound, arriving at the same anguish, as though this time the re-entering might resolve something the last entering did not. This is Anuveda, the piercing after. The second dart, travelling in the wake of the first. And you have been reading that second dart as proof of the depth of the first one. You have been reading the replaying as evidence of the wound's gravity. You have been measuring the injury by the frequency of the return and finding, in the fact of the return, a kind of validation that the original event deserved to hurt as much as it did. But the second dart is not a measurement of the first dart's depth. The second dart is only evidence that you are still holding the bow. That is what can shift tonight. Not the memory of the first arrow, that may remain. Not the feeling of it, the teaching does not ask you to feel less, but the understanding that the replay is not the event, that the anguish of the third return and the 17th return and the return at 2 a.m. is not the original wound reopening. It is the same wound being struck again, by the same bow, by the same hand. The hand you did not know you were using, because the bow has been drawn for so long, it became invisible, became part of the posture, became simply the way you hold yourself in relation to this particular thing that happened. You can hold that understanding gently, without demanding anything of it. You do not have to stop replaying tonight. You do not have to put the bow down on command. The teaching is not a command. It is a lamp. It shows you what is in the room, what you do next, and when, and at what pace. That is yours to find in your own time, in your own manner, with the kind of patience the reciters had for the 4 centuries they spent holding these words in their breath. For tonight, the lamp is enough. The seeing is enough. The small, quiet, extraordinarily old knowledge that there are 2 darts, not one, and that one of them has a maker. And the maker is not your enemy. The maker is only your mind, doing the only thing it knew, reaching the only way it knew to reach. We will come to what it was reaching for. We will come to the buried second half of the discourse, the part that names the reflex and its 3 branches, and the single distinction that makes all the difference. But the night is still long, and there is no need to rush toward understanding. Rest here for a moment now. Let this be where the words slow to almost nothing. Take a long, unhurried breath, in through the nose, down through the chest, and into the belly. The belly rising softly the way the surface of still water rises before it stills again. and then let it go, the long exhale, slow, unclenched. The air finding its own way out the way water finds its own way down. Notice, if you like, the weight of the body, the specific familiar weight of your own hands at your sides, or folded on your chest, or wherever they have come to rest. The way the legs are heavier than you usually notice at this hour in this quiet. The way the mind, when it is not being asked to do anything, begins to soften at its edges, the thoughts arriving more slowly. The intervals between them growing, the way snow begins to thin near the end of a storm, still present, but less insistent, less precise. The two darts are still there, if you want them, one in each open hand. But the hands are growing heavy now, and heavy hands set things down on their own, without asking permission, without needing to decide. Let the hands be heavy. Let the breath go on finding itself. And when you are ready, when the next thought arrives that wants to know what comes next, in the Sallatha Sutta, what the Buddha said the untrained mind reaches for after the second dart has landed, we will continue together. The text is patient. It has always been patient. It waited 4 centuries in the lungs of the barker before it found a written page. It waited 25 centuries before it found this room, this night, this particular dark, and the specific and unrepeatable weight of your body settling a little further into rest. It can wait one more breath. So we continue. There is a place in the Sallatha Sutta that most people who know this teaching have never read. Not because it is hidden, it is right there in the next few lines, following naturally from the 2-dart image. But the image is so vivid, so complete in itself, that the mind tends to close around it and stop. The picture satisfies something, and so the reader or the listener sets the text down, carries the picture away, and goes on with their life holding 2 arrows, knowing about 2 arrows. Perhaps even telling someone else about 2 arrows, and never knowing what the Buddha said happened next. What he said happened next is, in some ways, the most useful part. Let us return to the Puthajjana, the uninstructed worldling, the ordinary person, the one not yet trained in this particular kind of seeing. They have been struck by the first dart. The painful feeling, dukkha vedan, the felt tone of pain, has arrived in the body the way a real dart would arrive, suddenly, undeniably, in the place it landed. And as we have already seen, the uninstructed person is then struck by the second dart, the mental anguish, the sorrow, the resistance, the frantic story-making, the grief over the grief. 2 darts, 2 feelings, the bodily one and the mental one together. But the sutta does not put the text down there. It continues. And what it says next is this: the uninstructed worldling, having been struck by the painful feeling, resists it. Not just in the way of wishing it were otherwise, a deeper resistance, a pushing against, an inner hardening around the fact of the pain. The Pali term is paya, which we might render as aversion or repulsion or the quality of pushing away. The uninstructed person feels pain and harbours aversion toward the pain. They are not simply hurting. They are hurting and refusing the pain in a way that keeps them tightly fastened to it, the way a fist closes harder around the thing it wants to release. And then, and this is the line that opens something when you hear it slowly, the uninstructed worldling, still in pain, still resistant, still fastened to the painful feeling, seeks delight in sensual pleasure. The text is clear about why. Because, the Buddha says, the uninstructed worldling does not know any escape from painful feeling other than sensual pleasure. Read that again, softly, from the inside. They do not know any other way out. Not that they are weak, not that they are lazy or self-indulgent or spiritually undeveloped in some shameful way. They reach because reaching is the only door they can see. The room is full of pain, and the only visible exit is marked with a small, temporary relief, a distraction, a sweetness, something to put between the self and the thing that is hurting. And so they go there, not because they chose poorly, but because they have not yet found the other door. Sit with that for a moment, the compassion in that framing. The Buddha is not describing a character flaw, he is describing a navigation problem. The worldling is in pain and is doing what any reasonable creature does in pain, looking for the nearest exit. The nearest exit they can see is sensual pleasure, and that can mean the obvious ones: a drink, food, a body, sleep reached for out of desperation, but in the context of our particular night. Our particular replaying, it also means something subtler, the small satisfactions of the replaying mind itself. This may sound strange at first. How could replaying be pleasurable? The replaying is painful, and yet the mind keeps doing it, which means something in the replaying is serving a function. There is a kind of grim utility to the loop, a sense that if we go over it one more time, the thing that happened will somehow resolve. The mind, in its aversion to the painful event, keeps trying to fix what is already done. It reaches for the comfort of a resolution that cannot come, because what it is reaching toward has already happened. This is the reaching the sutta is pointing at. Not only the obvious grasping at pleasure, the more subtle grasping that wears the face of diligence, of trying to understand, of refusing to accept the unacceptable, all of it the same underlying motion, the same reaching in the dark for the only exit the worldling knows. And here is the thing the trained disciple knows that the worldling does not. There is another door. The sutta says it plainly. The trained disciple, struck by the same painful feeling, does not seek deliverance from it in sensual pleasure, because he knows an escape from painful feeling other than sensual pleasure. This is the difference. Not that the trained disciple does not feel pain, not that they are somehow hardened to it, or above it, or sealed off from it. They feel the first dart fully. The text has already told us this, and we have already held it. They feel it. But they do not then add the second dart, and they do not then reach for the only visible exit, because they have found or been shown that there is a third option. We will come to that third option. It lives in the next part of this night, the teaching about the seam, the gap, the practice. But let the shape of it settle here, just the shape. There is something between the pain and the reaching. There is a place where the hand has not yet grasped, and the arrow has not yet been loosed. The trained person has learned to find that place. The worldling has not yet found it, and so they keep walking through the only door they can see, straight back into the room they were trying to leave. Let us explore a story about this. There was a man who lived alone in a house with a single window. Every evening as the sun went down, the light through that window was the most beautiful light he had ever seen, warm and slanted and golden. And every evening, just as the light was at its most beautiful, the window would crack, a hairline fracture would appear, working its way slowly across the glass. This happened every evening. The house was settling, or the temperature was shifting, or the wood of the frame was old. He did not know why. Only that the crack appeared. At first he grieved the cracks genuinely. Each one was a loss. The glass was original to the house. It could not be replaced. And so the grief was real, and the grief was right, in the way that grief for something beautiful and irreplaceable is right and proper. The light through the cracked glass was still beautiful, but different. Marked, and he felt the marking. The first dart landed, and he let it land. But then, over time, something else began. He started to sit each evening, not only watching the window, but watching for the crack. His attention, which had once rested on the light itself, the warmth of it, the way it moved across the floor, the quality of the late-day gold, his attention began to fix itself on the glass, on the waiting for the fracture. He began, unconsciously, to rehearse the crack, to pre-feel it. And because the crack always came, he was always right, which gave the rehearsal a kind of reward, the small, sour satisfaction of having anticipated the wound. And in the evenings when the light came and there was no new crack, he found that he could not quite trust it. He sat and watched the glass with a vigilance that left no room for the light itself. He was protecting himself from a future hurt by pre-living it, which meant he was living in a future hurt constantly, even on the evenings when nothing happened. The first arrow had fallen years ago. He was still ducking. And in time, and this is the part that closes slowly, like a door settling in its frame, he forgot what it had felt like to simply watch the light. This is the reaching the Sutta names. The mind, having been struck, does not only grieve what was struck, it begins to organize itself around the grief, to take the grief as its primary task, to seek. In the vigilance and the rehearsal and the pre-living of the next blow, a kind of consolation. Not pleasure in any obvious sense, but the comfort of the familiar wound, the comfort of a known shape, even if the shape is pain. Because a known pain is safer, in some way the frightened mind understands, than the open unknown of a present moment that has not yet been hurt. The reaching can look like vigilance, it can look like care. It can look, from the inside, like the responsible thing to do, the reasonable thing, the loving thing, to keep watch, to not be caught off guard again, to hold the memory of the harm close enough that it cannot sneak up a second time. But the Sutta names it for what it is: a reaching, an exit through the only visible door, and the door leads back to the same room. Let us rest a moment in that. Take a slow breath, a real one, the kind that moves the chest and the belly without being asked to. Let the air find what it finds. And when you are ready, we will continue, because there is more here, and it is worth going slowly. What we have been circling is a map. The Sallatha Sutta is giving us a map of something that happens in the mind so quickly that we usually only notice it after it is over, or sometimes never at all, because we are already in the next reaching before we have registered the first one. The map has more detail than the 2-dart image alone contains, and the extra detail is what makes it useful in the dark. In the particular dark of a night when the mind will not settle. The map has 3 territories. The Buddha names 3 kinds of feeling, 3 Vedana, 3 felt tones, and he names what happens in the untrained mind in response to each of them. And the word he uses for what happens is unsee, latent tendency. Underlying disposition. The Sanskrit cognate anuvaya carries the sense of something that has settled at the bottom, like sediment in water, invisible until the water is disturbed, and then suddenly, unmistakably present. An anusaya is not quite the same as a habit, though it works like one. It is more like a groove in the mind that has been worn there over time, over many repetitions of the same response to the same trigger. It is the pre-verbal, pre-decided reaction, the thing the mind does before you have a chance to notice that it is doing anything. The first movement, the one that happens before the first thought. 3 feelings, 3 anusayas, one for each. The first is the one we have been living with tonight. Dukkha Vedan, the painful feeling, the felt tone of pain in the body. When the untrained mind meets a painful feeling, the anusaya that is reinforced, the groove that is worn a little deeper, is painusaya, the latent tendency of aversion, of pushing away, of resistance to the thing as it is. Every time the untrained mind meets pain and resists it, the aversion becomes a little more automatic, a little more immediate, a little more deeply grooved. Until the resistance and the pain arrive together so close in time that they seem like one thing, so that we come to believe that pain just is accompanied by this tightening, this pushing, this refusal, that the two are not two. The sutta is showing us that they are two. The pain comes from outside, from contact, from the event. The resistance comes from inside, from the groove worn in the mind by previous resistance. It is the second dart launched by painusaya, by the habitual, latent, already grooved tendency to push away what hurts. The second territory, Sukha Vedan, the pleasant feeling, the felt tone of pleasure, and the anusaya that meets it in the untrained mind is rugnusaya, the latent tendency of lust or greed or grasping, the quality of wanting to hold what pleases us, to extend it, to fix it in place, to make it stay past the moment it was given. We feel something good, and the groove pulls us toward making it permanent, which of course it cannot be. Which means the good feeling carries its own quiet ache, the anticipation of its ending, even while it is still present. We are not asked to think about the pleasant feeling tonight, particularly the night is not that kind of night. But we might notice, passing, that the reaching the puthajjana does when in pain, the seeking of sensual pleasure, is this exact motion, moving from the aversion groove toward the grasping groove, from painusaya toward rugnusaya, pushing the pain away and pulling the relief toward us. The two grooves work together the way a swing works, back and forth. Resistance, reaching, and neither one of them looks at what is actually here. The third territory is the quietest, and in some ways the most tender. Adukkhamasukha Vedan, the neither painful nor pleasant feeling. The neutral one, the felt tone that is simply present, without quality, without the pull toward or the push away. Most of our moments are actually in this territory, if we looked. The feeling of the air coming in through the nose, the temperature of the room, the weight of the bed beneath us. These are not pleasant in any heightened sense. They are not unpleasant. They simply are. And the anusaya that meets this in the untrained mind is avijnusaya, the latent tendency of ignorance. Not ignorance in a judgmental sense, not stupidity, not carelessness, but the particular quality of not seeing that comes when the mind has decided there is nothing here to see. The neutral feeling is so undemanding that the untrained mind drifts over it, past it, through it, into memory or anticipation or story, because the neutral feeling does not call out, does not grab the hand, does not insist. It is simply here. And so the mind trained toward aversion and toward grasping passes through the present moment of neutral feeling the way a traveller passes through a city they have not learnt to see, not because there is nothing there, but because the traveller has learned to move quickly through places without obvious landmarks, looking always for what is next. Let us explore a story about this. There was a woman who had been a baker since her 20s. She had learned in her grandmother's kitchen, and she had never stopped. Every morning before it was light she was awake, the dough was rising, the ovens were warm, and by the time the rest of the street had opened its eyes, she had already turned out more bread than most people would make in a month. Her days were made of flour and heat, and the particular knowledge of fermentation that you can only develop by watching, and failing, and watching again. She knew the weight of the right dough in her hands, the way a musician knows the right note in the ear, not by thinking, but by the accumulation of so many mornings that the knowing had become the hands themselves. And yet there had been, some years ago, a thing that happened, an argument, something said at a dinner by someone she had trusted, something that should not have been said, and that was said nonetheless, and that had the quality of an arrow when it arrived, unexpected, specific, and landing somewhere soft. She had grieved it. She had been right to grieve it. The first dart was real. But then, as the months went on, as she kneaded dough in the hours before the street woke up, she found that the argument was there too. In the early morning, in the in-between time of her hands working and her mind free-ranging, the conversation would come back. Exact, verbatim, she could replay the whole thing from the first word to the last, and she would. And then she would feel again what she had felt at the table, the same flush of betrayal, the same narrowing in the chest. And then she would send back the reply she had not said, the one that would have been perfect, the one that would have closed the wound, and then she would receive again the thing that had been said, and then she would send back the other reply, the gentler one, the more dignified one, and then she would begin to question whether the dignified reply was actually weakness, and the kneading would go on, and the dough would continue to rise, and she would be nowhere near the kitchen at all. She calculated, once, only once, and the calculation frightened her enough that she did not do it again. She calculated approximately how many hours she had spent, in the 3 years since the argument, replaying the dinner, and the number she arrived at was more than 500. More than 500 hours of her one life given to a conversation that had lasted 40 minutes and ended 3 years ago. The argument was the first dart. It was real. It had landed. The 500 hours were all second dart. And here is what the story of the baker and the sutta together are showing. The replaying was not happening in the territory of dukkha Vedana alone, not in the territory of pain alone. Much of it was happening in the territory of adukkhama sukha, the neutral time, the early morning before anything particular had happened, the hands working in a kind of blankness, the mind unasked and undemanded. And in that neutral space, the anusaya of ignorance, avijnusaya, pulled her away from the warmth of the present morning, the specific present weight of the dough, the specific present smell of the flour, the specific present quiet of the kitchen before the world was up. It pulled her into the past, which is no longer a place, and into the future, which is not yet. And she spent 500 hours in neither, not because she was broken, not because she was weak, not because there was something wrong with the way she was made, but because the groove had been worn, and grooves do what grooves do. They guide the water where they have always guided it. This is the landscape the 3 anusayas make together. The painful feeling triggers aversion. The pleasant feeling triggers grasping. The neutral feeling triggers the drift into abstraction, memory, story, and the mind that has not yet learned to see these 3 reflexes, as latent, grooved, inherited, unconscious tendencies, rather than as the truth of what is happening. That mind moves through each territory, doing what the groove tells it, and believes the whole time that it is simply experiencing reality. It is experiencing the groove. The feeling is real. The groove is not the feeling. The groove is what happens to the feeling once the anusaya gets hold of it. Let us rest here. Take a slow breath. Let the chest and the belly settle. Notice the temperature of the air, not because it is particularly interesting, but because it is actually here and you are actually in it, and that specific, present, unremarkable fact is the territory the sutta is pointing at, the neutral ground, the place our Vijnusaya wants to slide past, the place where the practice begins. The air at this specific temperature, arriving at this specific hour. Not the dinner table 3 years ago. This, and when you are ready, we will continue. The third piece of the map is the one that changes the shape of the whole picture, and it is contained in 2 words, Samyutta and visamyutta. We need to sit with these. The word Samyutta you may hear in the middle of it, the same root that gives us Samyutta Nikaya, the collection of connected discourses where this very sutta lives. Sa means together. Yutta, from the root yuj, to join, means yoked, fastened, bound, Samyutta, joined together. Attached, fettered, bound, to the thing alongside which you are moving. The image is of 2 oxen yoked to the same cart. They are not the same animal, but they are bound, they move together, and neither can turn without the other. The Buddha uses this word in the Sallatha Sutta to describe how the Puthujjana, the uninstructed person, feels. He feels each feeling Samyutta, attached, joined to it, fastened alongside it. And the Buddha adds simply, attached to it, I say. The formulation is almost gentle in its directness. I say, iti vadmi. The Buddha is not speaking from behind a veil of abstraction. He is stating, plainly, what he has observed. This is how the untrained person feels. They feel the feeling, and they feel attached to it. They do not simply have the experience has them. And the trained noble disciple, the Aryasvaka, the instructed, the learned one, feels the very same feeling visamyutta. V is a prefix of separation, of distinction, of coming apart. Visamyutta, unjoined. Disjoined, detached, unfettered, the same root, the same image, the same cart, but the yoke has been removed. The oxen are still present, the cart is still present, the road is still the road, but one animal can now turn without pulling the other. Read this slowly, because the thing it is saying is easy to miss, and it is the most important thing in the whole text. The difference between the Puthujjana and the Aryasvaka is not the feeling they have, it is the relationship they have with the feeling they have. The same painful feeling arrives in both of them, the same dukkha vedan, the same dart, the same landing, the same immediate bodily fact. Neither of them escapes the first arrow. The text has been clear about this since its beginning. The trained noble disciple still feels the bodily painful feeling. They are not sealed off from pain, they are not above it, or past it, or outside it. But the trained person feels it visamyutta. Unfettered, the feeling arrives and it is felt, and it passes through, the way water passes through a cupped hand, present, wet, real, gone. The untrained person feels its samyutta. Fastened, the feeling arrives and they are yoked to it, and now they go where it goes, which is often nowhere. A fixed point in time, a repeated moment, a groove that deepens with each circuit. Let us explore a story about this. 2 people received the same news on the same afternoon. Something they had hoped for has not come to pass. A thing that mattered to them, something they had allowed themselves to believe was possible, has resolved in the other direction, quietly and without appeal. The first person hears the news, puts down the phone, and sits. They feel the feeling. It is a sinking, a particular quality of weight in the chest, a sudden reordering of the landscape of the next few months, which will now look different from how they had imagined. They feel all of this. They feel it completely. There is no pretending, no pushing, no wrapping it in a story that makes it not what it is. It is a loss. The feeling of loss is present and real, and they let it be present and real. And then, after some time, not immediately, not with any effort, but in the way that weather changes when weather is allowed to change, the weight in the chest shifts slightly, not disappears. Shifts, the person goes to make tea. They stand at the kettle, and they are aware that they are standing at the kettle, and they are aware that something happened this afternoon, and they are aware that they do not yet know what the next few months will look like. All of that is true, and the kettle is also true, and the warmth of the cup in their hand is also true, and the evening continuing is also true. This is not indifference, this is not distance, this is visamyutta. The feeling came and was felt. The feeling is not cementing them to the afternoon. They can feel the afternoon and still be here, now, at the kettle, in the evening. The second person receives the same news at the same moment. They feel the same sinking, the same weight, the same reordering. And this is the moment the yoke descends, the moment Samyutta takes hold, the mind begins. It begins with why, how this came to pass, who made which decision, what could have been said or done differently, whether it was deserved, whether it was fair. It begins with what comes next, and the next after that, and how to explain to certain people what has happened. It begins to rehearse the news, telling it first to this imagined listener, and then to that one, calibrating the performance of loss for each audience. And all of this begins within the space of perhaps 30 seconds of putting down the phone. By the time evening comes, the second person has lived this afternoon perhaps 40 times. The sinking, the reordering, the rehearsal, the analysis, the sinking again, the injustice, the sinking again, the what should have been said, the what comes next. They are by now deeply tired, not in the good way, the way the body is tired when it has moved and worked and is ready to rest. In the other way, the way the mind is tired when it has been running on a closed circuit for hours and has generated nothing but heat. Both people were struck by the same dart. One of them is still in the afternoon. One of them is here, in the evening, in the actual present, with a cup of cooling tea and the knowledge that they have been hurt and that the evening is continuing nonetheless, and that they do not yet know what the next few months will look like, but that the months themselves will in fact come, one by one, and be navigable, because months have a way of being so. The difference is not the size of the wound. Both people felt it. The first person did not feel it less. The difference is the binding. Samyutta and visamyutta, attached and unfettered. And the crucial thing, the thing the sutta has been building toward and that we need to hold carefully, is that this difference is not a fixed property of the two people. The way eye color is a fixed property, or height is a fixed property. It is not that one person is constitutionally bound and the other constitutionally free. It is that one has learned, or been shown, or practiced, or stumbled into a way of being with the feeling that does not yoke them to it, and the other has not yet found that way. The sutta calls one person the Aryasvaka, the instructed noble disciple. The word instructed is in there for a reason. This is not a natural talent. This is a learned capacity. Instruction was received, something was understood, A different relationship became possible, and then was practiced, and then became the way the mind moves when pain arrives. Which means the binding is not permanent, which means the groove can be seen. And when a groove is seen, really seen, from the inside as it is happening, it loses some of its power to simply run without being noticed. Not all of it. The groove is still there. But something happens when the groove is seen. The water, flowing in the channel it has always used, pauses for one moment in an awareness that a channel is not the only possible path. And in that moment, the choice, if we want to call it that, and the sutta is careful about this word, in that moment, the smallest possible opening appears. We call it, in the teaching that comes next, the gap. But that belongs to the next part of this night, the seam between the feeling and the craving, the specific practice the sutta is pointing toward, the place where the second arrow has not yet been loosed and the bow is still in the hand. For now, let us rest with what we have been given in this part. Let it settle without being organized. The mind does not need to file this under a category tonight. It does not need to remember the Pali terms, though they are beautiful and worth returning to. What it needs, if anything, is just the shape of the map. 3 feelings, 3 grooves, pain and the push away, pleasure and the pull toward, neutral and the drift into story. And underneath all 3, the question the sutta has been quietly placing in the room: are you fastened to the feeling, or are you with the feeling but free? Not free from it, free alongside it. Visamyutta, unjoined, but not absent. Still feeling, still here. Still the specific and unrepeatable person in this specific and unrepeatable bed on this specific and unrepeatable night. But not yoked. Not pulled where the feeling pulls. Not running on the circuit the groove has laid. The baker is still kneading dough. But tonight, for this one morning that is also all mornings, the hands are here in the flour, and the flour is warm, and the kitchen is quiet, and the specific smell of the yeast doing what yeast does in the particular darkness before the street wakes up. That smell is here too, and it is enough to be worth noticing. The second person, somewhere, is putting down the phone, and the evening is still the evening. And the tea is still going to be warm, and the sinking in the chest is real and will be honoured, and the afternoon happened and was real, and the next few months are unknown and will be met. 1 dart, not 2. The feeling itself, complete, fully felt, not diminished, not bypassed, not wrapped in a story that makes it less than what it is. And then the next moment. And then the one after that. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it come all the way in, the way breath comes in on its own, when the body is allowed to decide. And let it find its own way out. Not controlled. Not measured. Just the breath, being what breath is, moving because that is what breath does. Feel the weight of the bed beneath you. The weight of the body that has been carrying the day, and the days before it, and the particular event that the mind has been circling tonight. The body has been carrying all of it without complaint, without analysis, without asking whether what it is carrying is fair. The body just carries. The back, the hips, the hands, the legs, which have been doing the work of walking you through your days without being thanked. They are here, heavy, honest, present. The night is continuing. The Bhaka reciters, all those centuries ago, would have stopped here, in the teaching about the 3 Vedans and the 3 Anusayas and the difference between Samyutta and Visamyutta, and they would have paused. breathed, held the shape of what had just been said in the body of the community before moving on. The pause was part of the teaching. The silence around the words was not empty space waiting to be filled with more words. It was a place to feel what the words had pointed at. You are in that pause now. The text has just made three things available: the map of the three feelings and their grooves, the image of the yoke descending and the yoke removed, and the quiet suggestion, not announced, just present, that the binding is not permanent, that instruction exists, that the way the mind has been moving through its pain is a response that was learned and therefore can in some other morning be met differently. You do not need to do anything with that tonight. The sutta is not asking you to do anything with it tonight. You have been struck. The wound is real. The second arrows are also real, and they have been landing for however long they have been landing, and you were counting them as evidence of the depth of the wound, and now you are beginning to see. Just beginning, just the first edge of it, no more than a sliver of light under a door, that they were evidence of the groove, not the wound. The wound was the first arrow. The groove is the bow. And you are here, in this bed, in this night, having heard something that 25 centuries of people in the dark have heard before you, and found, in some different early morning, that it had changed the way the room looked when the pain arrived again, not eliminated the room, not sealed the door against all future pain, changed the way it looked, given a second door where before there had only been one. Let the breath go on. The next part of this night will offer the seam itself, the gap between the feeling and the craving, the place where the second arrow has not yet been loosed. We will sit with the teaching on Pali Samyutta, dependent origination. The seventh link, the place where contact becomes feeling, becomes craving, and the whole circuit begins again. And we will find, in that chain, not a fatalism, but an opening. A small, specific place where something is possible that is not possible at any other point in the chain. That is ahead. For now, let the body be heavy. Let the mind be whatever it is. A little lighter, perhaps, than it was when this night began. Or not, that is also all right. The teaching does not require you to feel better by a certain point. It is not a treatment with a specified time to effect. It is a lamp held up to a terrain you have been moving through in the dark. And whether you see more of the terrain tonight, or only next week, or only in some morning 3 years from now, the lamp has been held, and the terrain has been there all along, and it will still be there when you are ready to look. Take one more breath, long and slow, the kind that fills the space between the shoulders all the way through and finds the floor of the lungs where the air usually does not bother to go. And when you are ready, when the next thought comes that wants to know what the gap looks like, what the practice is, what it means to find the seam between the feeling and the craving in the middle of a night that will not let you go, we will continue together. The sutta is still here. Patient. It has always been patient, and the night is still the night, and you are still you, and the body knows, even when the mind does not, that rest is possible. One breath more. There is a place in the mind's own architecture where the second dart is either loosed or laid down. Not a place you can find on a diagram. Not a place you can locate by thinking harder about it. But a place that is nonetheless real, that the teaching names with precision, and that you may have brushed against tonight already without knowing what it was. Let us go there now. The chain is called Pali Samyutta. That word in Pali means something like dependent origination, The idea that nothing arises alone, that every state of mind has a parent, and that parent has a parent, and the whole sequence is knowable, link by link. The way a path through a forest becomes knowable once someone holds a lantern over each stone in turn. The Buddha taught this chain in many forms and at many lengths. At its fullest, it has 12 links, reaching from ignorance all the way through to aging and death. But for our purposes tonight, we need only 3 of them, because these 3 are where the Sallatha Sutta lives. The third to last link before craving is phassa, contact, the bare moment when a sense organ meets an object, when the eye meets a shape, when the ear meets a sound, when the mind meets a memory. Something touches you. That is phassa. It is not good or bad in itself. It is simply the meeting. From contact, the next link arises. Vedana, feeling, the felt tone of the contact, pleasant or painful, or that middle category the sutta calls neither painful nor pleasant, which is its own kind of fog. Vedana is not a thought about the contact, it is not an interpretation, it is the raw charge that the meeting carries, the way a tuning fork carries a tone, the instant it is struck. The body feels something before the mind has made a sentence about it. That is Vedana. And from feeling, the next link, craving, the movement toward or away, wanting the pleasant feeling to stay, wanting the painful feeling to stop, and in both cases, wanting, the whole engine of reaching and resisting that the sutta has been describing from the beginning as the second dart. Phassa, Vedana, contact, feeling, craving. The second dart is loosed at the hinge between Vedana and between the feeling and the craving, between being struck and beginning to pull the string. That hinge is the gap. It is a small gap. In ordinary waking life, moving fast, distracted, it has no width at all. Contact becomes feeling, becomes craving in less than an eye blink, and the whole circuit completes before any part of the mind has noticed it happening. The dart is loosed before you knew you were holding the bow. This is not a failure of character. It is what happens when the gap has never been pointed at, when no one has ever said to you, "There is a seam here." It is real. It can be found. What the sutta offers, not as a demand, not as a homework assignment, but as an observation you can hold in a tired mind without effort, is simply this. The gap exists. Between the feeling and the craving, there is a moment that is only feeling, before craving begins. The dart has struck. The pain is real. And then there is, for a breath, a duration that is nothing but the rawness of being struck. Before the mind leans into aversion, before it reaches for distraction, before the replay begins, there is one beat that is only contact and feeling, with no second arrow added yet. The practice, if we want to call it that, is not to make that gap wider by effort. It is not to push the craving away, because pushing is itself a craving. It is simply to find the gap where it already is. To notice with the quality of noticing a sound rather than the quality of solving a problem, that there is a moment before the second dart. To let the first arrow be exactly what it is, without immediately adding anything to it. Tonight, in this bed, in this night that will not let you go, if the event comes again, the sentence someone said, the thing that cannot be changed. There may be a moment, early before the replay fully begins, when you can feel the rawness of it without yet knowing what you are about to do with it. That moment is the gap. Not an escape, not a cure, only a place to stand, briefly, before the habit of the second arrow takes over. And standing there, even for one breath, is the entire practice. Not because one breath dissolves the pain, but because one breath in the gap is one breath in which you have not added the second dart to a wound that is already real. You do not need to get better at this tonight. You do not need to have gotten better at it last time. The gap is not a test. It is only a description of what is already there. Rest in that. As long as you like, the gap is not going anywhere. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the chest open and soften. Let the hands go flat and heavy where they rest. Notice what is here, the body, the dark, the air, and somewhere underneath the turning of the mind, a quality of simple being that has not been wounded by anything tonight. The awareness that is watching all of this, the thoughts, the feeling, the replay, that awareness has not been struck. Not once. It is watching. It is whole. It is doing nothing but holding the space, the way a room holds weather without becoming the weather. When you are ready, we will continue. There is a man named Stephen Hayes who, decades after this sutta was spoken, was working with people in real pain, clinical pain, the kind the Western medical system classifies and treats, and he noticed something. He noticed that there seemed to be two layers to human suffering, and that most treatments were aimed at the first layer, while the second layer continued, quietly and reliably, to cause most of the damage. He called them, in plain language, clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain is the pain that is unavoidable, the grief that comes because someone is gone, the fear that arrives because something dangerous is real, the sorrow of failure or loss, the ache of a body that is aging, the shock of a truth that changes everything. Clean pain is the first arrow. It is the thing that actually happened. It hurts because it is real. Dirty pain is what the mind adds. The replaying, the self-blame, the why did I do that, and why did they do that, and I should have known, and what does this mean about who I am? The predictions of future pain built from the materials of the present one. The stories told about the original event that are not the event, but that feel. In the body. Like the event. Which is why the body stays tight at 3 a.m. over something that ended months ago. Dirty pain does not mean unimportant. It does not mean you deserve to suffer. It means it is pain you are generating right now from a source that has finished generating its own portion. Hayes called it this not to shame anyone, but to separate the two. To give people a way of noticing, which of these am I in right now? The feeling in this moment, is it the event, or is it my response to the event? Clean or dirty? First arrow or second? The vocabulary is different. The map is the same. Around the same time, a man named John Kabat-Zinn was working with a different population, people with chronic physical illness and chronic pain, and he came to the same division. He called them primary suffering and secondary suffering. Primary, the inescapable. Secondary, the elaboration the mind builds over the top of it. He had not designed his program around the Sallatha Sutta, but when practitioners of his tradition encountered the sutta, they recognized it immediately. The way you recognize a place you have been when you see a photograph of it from above. And there is a woman named Susan Nolan Hoeksema who spent her career studying what she called rumination, the repetitive, involuntary replaying of past events and their meanings, the thing that keeps the replay running when the event itself is finished. She made a finding that is, when you hear it, both obvious and quietly enormous, rumination is not a personality type. It is not a trait you were born with or a fixed feature of who you are. It is a response style, a habit, something the mind does repeatedly that it learned to do and that can, with attention, be unlearned. The common American self-description, "I'm just an overthinker, that's who I am," treats the replaying mind as identity. Nolen Hoeksema's work says, "It is a thing you do, not a thing you are." And the Buddha's formulation says the same thing in different words. He does not say the untrained person is someone who feels two darts. He says the untrained person feels two darts, feels, does, experiences, as a result of how the mind has been trained or not been trained by contact with the teaching. The second arrow is an action, a habitual, reflexive, barely visible action, but an action, which means it is possible to do it less. These three, Hayes, Kabat-Zinn, Nolen Hoeksema, did not reach the same map by reading the Sallatha Sutta. They reached it by watching people in pain carefully for a long time and describing what they saw. The Sutta reached it by the same method 25 centuries earlier. We note the convergence not because it proves anything about ancient texts or modern science, but because convergence from different directions is how we know when a description is touching something real. When a person alone in a cave and a researcher alone in a clinic, separated by millennia and by every conceivable difference in method and language and worldview, look at the same thing and draw the same picture, the thing is probably there. You do not need to believe the sutta in order to recognize the picture. You have drawn it yourself on many nights with nothing but the quality of your own suffering. And now we come to the end of the text. To the Gita, the verse that closes the discourse, the way a candle flame settles at the end of a long breath. In the Pali tradition, many suttas close in verse. And scholars believe this is because the verse was the part most reliably preserved in oral transmission, a structure the memory could not easily drop or reshape, the way a melody holds words, the way prose does not. The Gita of the Sallatha Sutta is brief. It is almost startling in its quietness after the architecture that preceded it. Let us come to it slowly. The verse speaks of the wise and learned one. Not a saint in a far country, not someone who has attained some permanent state of numbness or transcendence. The wise and learned one is simply a person who has understood the teaching, who has found the gap, who has, through long practice, loosened the binding between feeling and craving enough that the second dart is no longer the automatic next event after the first. This person, the verse says, does not feel the mental feeling of pleasure and pain. The physical feeling is still there. The first arrow still lands. But the mental layer, the elaboration, the story, the replay, the second dart, does not arrive the way it arrives for the untrained mind. And the verse names this as the great difference between the wise one and the ordinary person. For one who has fathomed the Dhamma, the verse continues, seeing this world and the next clearly. Desirable things do not disturb the mind, and undesirable things bring no resistance. That word, resistance, it appears again. We met it earlier when the sutta described how the untrained person reacts to pain by resisting it, by harbouring aversion, which is itself the mechanism by which the second dart is loosed. And here at the end of the discourse, in the verse, the image is inverted. Undesirable things bring no resistance. Not because they are not felt, because the binding is loose. Because the teaching has done what teaching does when it is met with practice, it has changed the shape of the gap, made it wide enough to stand in, made it possible to feel the undesirable thing without immediately seizing it with both hands and pulling. Desirable things do not disturb the mind. This is the other side. We have spoken mostly tonight about painful feelings, about the arrow of grief and loss, and the thing you cannot stop replaying. But the sutta maps pleasant feelings too, and their reflex is not aversion, but grasping, rignusaya. The latent tendency toward lust and greed, the reaching for the pleasant thing to stay, the way the mind chases what it has liked, the way a pleasant evening becomes. In the untrained mind, the seed of future mourning, because the evening will end. The wise person feels the pleasure, does not deny it, and is not disturbed by the fact that it will pass, because the need to hold it does not arise. Two poles, two reflexes, one teaching. The sutta contains both, and the gith names both, and the practice, the gap, the seam, the one breath before the craving takes over, applies equally to both. Let the verse rest in you for a moment. You do not need to attain anything it describes tonight. You do not need to be the wise person in the verse. You only need to have heard the verse, to have let it sit where it has sat, to know that the possibility is real, that the picture has been drawn and can be looked at whenever you are ready. That is enough for a night. And now let us ask, quietly, what is perhaps the last open question this discourse holds? Why did it last? There are thousands of texts that do not last. Thousands of teachings spoken by people of intelligence and care and deep practice that were heard and loved and repeated once or twice and then simply did not find enough hands to carry them forward. The world is full of wisdom that did not survive its own generation. So why did this one, so short, so simple in its central image, survive the fall of empires and the erosion of languages and the shipwreck of libraries, and arrive here tonight, in this room, in this bed, where it can still do what it was designed to do? Part of the answer is the bhakka, the reciters, the specialist monks who memorized the suttas and chanted them and passed them body to body, generation to generation. For roughly 400 years before anyone wrote them down. The Pali Canon was committed to writing, by traditional account, at a council at a place called Aluvihra in Sri Lanka around 29 BCE. Before that, the texts lived in human memory, not in the fragile memory of any single person, but in the collective, redundant, overlapping memory of a tradition that trained people specifically for this. The bhakka did not just recite, they recited in groups, so that any deviation from the memorized text would be audible to the others, correctable in the same session, never allowed to drift far before it was caught. And for that kind of transmission, the repetitions are not a stylistic choice, they are the technology. The worldling's paragraph and the noble disciple's paragraph, mirrored almost word for word, are not the text saying the same thing twice, because it could not think of a second thing to say. They are the text saying, this is how you carry a comparison in memory without writing it down. You anchor one pole, you anchor the other, you feel the gap between them in the rhythm of the recitation itself, and you do not forget. The repetition is the method of keeping the shape intact across centuries of transmission by human voice alone. This is why the slow reading of the sutta with its repetitions is not an affectation. It is a restoration. It is the text being used in the mode for which it was designed. Heard slowly, with the mirror of the two paragraphs both present. The teaching enters through a different door than it enters when you encounter it as a paraphrase in a modern book. The voice carries the architecture, the rhythm carries the meaning. And somewhere in the body, at a level below argument, the separation between the first dart and the second is felt rather than only understood. But there is another reason the text lasted, and it is perhaps less technical and more human. The image is unforgettable. A body struck by a dart, a second dart finding the same wound. Two feelings where there was one event. This is an image that, once it is given to you, cannot be returned. You cannot unsee it. You cannot hear about a night of replaying afterward without a part of the mind, even if small, even if quiet, recognizing the shape. There is the first dart, and there is the second dart, the one I am holding. The image does the work of the argument without requiring the argument to run every time. That is the mark of a picture that will last. It self-propagates. It changes the person who holds it, and the changed person carries it forward without effort, the way you carry an image from a dream that was too vivid to dissolve into morning. 25 centuries is a long time for a piece of cloth to hold its shape, but this is not cloth. This is a picture that enters a mind and becomes part of how the mind sees itself, which means it travels not in libraries, but in people, and people are harder to lose than libraries. And so it arrived here, in this room, in your hands, which do not need to hold it tightly. You only need to let it rest. Let us gather what this night has offered, before the words fall quiet and leave you to the dark and the sleep that is waiting. We came in with a wound, something that happened once, in real time, in the world, that the mind has been returning to, replaying, keeping alive, long after the event itself has ended. We did not come in order to solve it, or to be talked out of it, or to be told that stronger people would have let it go by now. We came because the night is long, and the mind will not stop. And there is something exhausting about being alone with a replay that knows no closing time. The Sallatha Sutta met us where we were. It said, "You were struck." Something real happened. The first arrow landed, and it hurt, and the pain it caused is real pain, not invented, not a sign of weakness, not something the wise feel less of. The noble disciple, the person in the teaching who has practiced for years and understood the architecture of the mind deeply, still feels the first arrow. Fully, the teaching does not ask you to feel less about the original thing. That is the permission the sutta offers that almost nothing else offers. The usual message, spoken or implied, is, the pain means something is wrong with you. The sutta says, the pain means you were struck, which is simply what happens to a body when it is struck. The pain is not the problem. What came next is the problem. Or rather, what came next is the thing that is optional, not in a blaming way, not in a you should simply choose differently way, but in the way that a habit is optional. A habit that has run so long and so automatically that it no longer feels like a choice. A habit that the mind runs the way the body runs breathing, without asking permission, without announcing itself, without being noticed until someone points at the space between the breaths and says, there is a gap here. You did not know it was there, but it was always there. The second arrow, the sorrow that arrived after the pain. The resistance to the feeling, the way the mind seized the painful thing and pulled against it, which is the mechanism by which the original event becomes a recurring event, happening again and again in the body long after its moment in the world has closed. And then, after the resistance, the reaching, the grasping for distraction, for comfort, for something that would quiet the first feeling, because the untrained mind does not know any exit from painful feeling other than sensual pleasure. The reaching for something sweet, something numbing, something that might drown the dart out. The scroll, the replay of a different, better version of events, the imagined conversation in which you said the right thing and the wound did not happen. These are not evidence of how badly you were hurt. They are evidence of how long you have been holding the bow. The bow, not the wound. The action, not the identity. Something you have been doing, not something you permanently are. And then we found the gap, the thin seam between Vedana and Ta, between feeling and craving, between the raw strike of the first arrow and the moment the hand reaches for the second. Contact finds the mind, feeling rises, and there is, before craving begins, one moment that is only feeling. One moment in which the first arrow is simply what it is, not yet amplified, not yet attached to a story, not yet pulling another dart from the quiver. One breath in that gap is not a cure. It is not a resolution. It is a moment of not adding. And that moment is real, and it is available, and it is the whole of the practice this sutta offers. We found that 3 other people, working alone, in different centuries and methods, drew the same map. Stephen Hayes, who called it clean pain and dirty pain. Jean Kabat-Zinn, who called it primary and secondary suffering. Susan Nolan Hoeksema, who looked at the replaying mind and found it was a habit, a learned response, not a sentence handed down at birth. Different languages. The same terrain. And we read the closing verse. The wise one, undisturbed by the desirable and unresisting to the undesirable. Not because the world is different for the wise one. Because the binding is different. Because the gap has been found so many times that it is no longer a gap but a home, a place the mind knows how to return to, the way a hand knows the shape of something it has held long enough. You do not need to have found the gap tonight. You do not need to have loosened any binding. You do not need to be closer to the wise one in the verse than you were when this began. You only need to have heard it, to have let the picture form, 2 darts, 1 wound, one held in an old hand that belongs to you, and to let that picture sit in the mind gently, not as a demand, not as evidence against yourself, but as a lamp held over terrain you have been crossing in the dark for a long time. You have not been wrong to feel the first arrow. You have not been weak to feel the second. You have been human, moving through experience the way the uninstructed worldling moves, the way almost everyone moves, in the way the sutta describes without judgment or scorn, because the sutta was written by someone who had watched this happen to every person he had ever met, including himself, long before the teaching came. And the teaching did come. It came in a voice we cannot hear anymore, in a language most people alive cannot read, and it travelled 4 centuries in human mouths before it was written down, and it outlasted the civilization that first held it, and the one after that, and it arrived here, in a translation made freely available on a website you can reach from your bed, in words that are simple enough to hear while the mind is dissolving into sleep. That is not a small thing. That is something worth pausing at. Tonight, in this particular darkness, in the specific smallness of this room and this body and this night that has been difficult in its particular ways, a teaching that is 25 centuries old found you. Or you found it. Either way, the meeting happened. And the meeting is the teaching, not the words in the end, but the meeting between the words and the person who needed them, which is a meeting that only happens once, in a specific night, and that nothing in the world can unhappen. You do not need to remember any of it. If one thing stayed, the 2 darts, the gap, the bow in your own hand, the permission to feel the first arrow fully, let that one thing be enough. Let it rest where it landed. You do not need to carry it carefully. It knows how to stay. We have met the dart tonight, and we have met the wound, and we have stood very briefly in the thin space between being struck and reaching for the string. We have met the worldling who feels two feelings when one event strikes, and recognized ourselves in the description without shame, because the sutta offers it without shame. We have met the disciple who feels one, and understood that this is not a person made of different material, but a person who has practiced finding the gap again and again, until the gap became familiar and the second dart became something recognized rather than automatic. We have met the verse at the end, the one that closes like a candle, finding its natural height. Desirable things do not disturb the mind. Undesirable things bring no resistance. Two poles, one practice, one life in which the binding slowly loosens, not all at once, not tonight necessarily, but over time, over the accumulation of moments in which the gap was found and the second dart was simply not loosed. And we have held the sutta itself, short enough to read before sleep, old enough to have outlasted almost everything else, simple enough to contain in one image, precise enough to still be useful in a room like this one, in a night like this one, for a person exactly like you. The Sallatha Sutta, the dart, SN 36.6, a few paragraphs and a verse, 25 centuries, and a gap between the feeling and the craving that has been there all along, that is there right now, that requires nothing from you except the willingness to let it be pointed at. Let the hands go heavy, let the face go soft, let the mind be wherever it is, busy or quiet, sad or simply tired, without adding another arrow to what it is already carrying. The event happened when it happened. What is happening now is only this: a body at rest, a mind winding down, a night moving slowly toward the morning that is already on its way, whether the mind believes in it or not. The first arrow was real. The bow is down now. Let the wound be what it is, and let it begin, in its own time and in its own way, to do what wounds do when they are finally left alone. Sleep well. Thank you for spending this night here at Relaxing Subjects. Subject closed for the night. Let it all relax away.